I saw this one as probably one of the clearest ideas within the group. A little rough around the edges here and there, but great urban space to be in.
I thought that was a great aspiration to this project. I think the ones that really stuck out to me were both conceptually strong, but then also aspirational in terms of the kind of project that could kind of be realized. And I think in particular, thinking about the project as an urban infrastructure or as a public amenity for me was really exciting. I think one thing I was missing a little bit from it was to better understand the context, or to better understand the sort of immediate context of what this would mean in the city and what was nearby it, et cetera. But I think it's an interesting idea too, that there's kind of a series of datums that this person is introducing, and almost a landscape on the ground that then has a floating roof. And so I think that the tightness of moves, but then also I think the programming, I think works really nicely together. Yeah, I really appreciated this project. I think there's the different methods of representation alongside a very demanding brief that requires a very serious sensitivity, both ecologically, but then also as the brief requires for the memorial. And so I thought that it was quite an elegant scheme, incorporating both the landscape moves and also the architectural moves. And some of the things I thought were really powerful was the submersion of the architecture in certain moments, and the almost camouflaging it with these sort of really beautiful stones that the designer had decided to use for the project. And so I think that for me, it sort of demonstrates a restraint in a sense of like what this place can be, while also very carefully thinking out the sequence of moves and the sort of sequence of experience moving through this place. So I was really impressed with this project. And I think it really stood out from the other entries as thinking through ecological and environmental questions in parallel with the requirements of the design brief for the architecture.
Yeah, I agree. I was quite affected by the pretty insane renderings and photoshopping. I have never seen landscape handled in such loving detail and depth. My interest in this one was again for the tectonic clarity of it, as for the first one, and I should say on top of that also I guess you'd call it the restraint of it, and the being satisfied with the simple moves, very, very clearly and masterfully done, with just the most subtle, say, slope to roof and this sort of thing, fits it into the context in an interesting way without trying to mimic the context.
Super clean, super clear. Idea just translates right through. I think of all of them, it's simultaneously the easiest project, but at the same time, you recognize that, the skill that it takes to stick with the concept like this and to make it work. You kind of have to respect the skill involved in that.
So I chose this one. This was one of the first ones that popped up. I was particularly impressed by this project, I think, as a reflection on the moment that we're in, and perhaps the moment that we're going into. And so I think that the design begins to reflect on a version of a typology, perhaps, of what it means to have a crisis center, what it means to have something that's porous and open air. What does it mean to have porosity within a single unit? So I think that there's relationships to how parts and wholes fit together in the context of COVID, which I think is interesting. I think that it's great that the designer is beginning to start to question, like, how will things shift? How will things shift as a result of health and crisis, et cetera? And so I particularly appreciate that this was a kind of meditation on the possibilities of what that would mean.
I thought that the way that this project handled what is becoming a fairly fashionable and common trope in larger development projects of the introduction of nature was, from an architectural perspective, nicely handled. It wasn't simply a project of biomimicry or whatever, or jamming vegetation on every available surface, but accommodating the vegetation, the nature, to the architecture, or the architecture to the nature in ways that seemed appropriate to each, so that the bringing of the two worlds together doesn't particularly seem forced, as it often does.
I could just say, I mean, I think it was interesting because the debate was unanimous. It was very clear from the very beginning of the conversation which ones were the winning projects because of the conceptual clarity, and I think the rigor, and it communicates directly to the drawings. And so I think, as jurors, we were lucky that we were all actually on board from the very start. So I think that was great. And so I think the debates then came down to the jury citations, et cetera. So yeah, thank you.
I guess I would just want to commend the pool of entries as a whole, that there was a fairly, pretty high quality across the board for these things. And I've been on lots of juries, and that's not always the case. But, it speaks well to the architectural community, I guess, in Dallas, that you guys can put together a set of projects, unbuilt or otherwise, that, has that level of quality across the board.
It's great to view all these projects in such a kind of wide range on our work. And I kind of find these jury moments, like both kind of here in the professional world and at the school level, that, really refreshing, because now I can take something from this and draw from it, and draw from the energy that was apparent, and put it into my own work.